Good evening, everyone. Today, I, Nitesh Parashar, moderator of this session, welcome you all in the BCM of Standard on Internal Audit, that is Benchmark for Quality. This program is organized by Internal Audit Standard Board of ICI, hosted by Pimpri Chinkwad branch of WIRC of ICAI. I also welcome both the speakers who are with us, C. Ankur Gupta ji and C. Husiva ji, for this their technical session. And I also welcome CA Chandrakant B. Kale ji, the chairman of the branch, Pimpri Chinkwad branch of WIRC of ICI. Before starting the technical session, I would request branch chairman CA Chandrakant B. Kale ji for his opening remarks. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nitesh ji, for moderating this session. First of all, I would like to give thanks to the Internal Standard Audit Board of ICAI and their officials for giving our branch the opportunity of hosting this webinar today. I also thank and welcome both the speakers, CA Huzefa Anwala sir and CA Ankur Gupta on this virtual platform. And friends, today we are going to discuss on the internal audit, on the topic of internal audit. And today the speakers that we have today are very learned persons we have today, and we are going to hear them how the internal audit, what are the standards, and Ankurji is going to talk about SIA 230 and SIA 240. And Huzefa sir, who is going to talk to us firstly, who is going to talk on the primers of the internal auditing standards. Friends, we know that the standards on internal audit are established for uniform criteria, methods and processes that we should follow when we conduct the internal audit, so that we can do this internal audit in a more efficient and in proper way. With this, I would like to once again thank both the speakers and the internal audit standard boards. And therefore, I would like to now hand it over back to Parashar for further moderation. Over to you, Parashar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker, Husiva ji. Husiva ji is a senior partner at a firm and the founder of JHSN Associates LLP. He is on the board of Dexon Asia Pacific Private Limited as non-executive director. He serves as an expert member on the technology committee of a leading asset management company. He has over 23 years of composite experience in serving international, large and mid-sized clients in the area of management consultancy, business advisory, fraud investigation, internal audit, IT advisory, SOX, and IFC implementation assistance, and enterprise-wide risk management. Hufiza ji has played leadership role in his career mentoring large teams, serving global clients and developing practice innovations. He has made several notable contributions to the professional bodies like ICAI, IIA, BCAS, ISACA, CII, Indian Audit and Accounts, CAG, IBIN, and other professional forums. Sir, I welcome you on this forum and I request you to kindly take this forward from here.
Thank you, Chandrakant ji. Thank you, Nitesh. And a very warm welcome to everybody who's participating in the event today, including my co-speaker Ankur. And grateful to all of you all for having invited me. A quick check, is my sound quality okay?
Yes, sir, everything is okay.
Perfect. So as the opening batsman of the event, my job is to kind of give you a few starters and nuggets around the subject of standards of internal audit. It's a very dry subject, but in practice, it's a very exciting one, especially for those chartered accountants who look up to internal audit as a focused area of practice. This becomes a very, very important focus area in terms of adopting and implementing standards on internal audit. What I have done is that I have created a very detailed presentation for today, but I will be able to take you through only the first maybe 25-30 slides. and I'll leave the presentation for you, which is a summary of all the standards on internal audit, key elements of the 21 standards. So before I begin the presentation, let me take you through the structure of the entire presentation. I will take you through the background of the standards, what are the key concepts, the key messages. There are 4 slides that are prepared which will help you understand what are the key messages in a summary format and what we need to do as practitioners of internal audit. And then if time permits, we will definitely deep dive into 4 or 5 standards on internal audit which are new and which are important. So let me share my screen with all of you. I hope this is visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
So the topics that I will discuss with you in the next 45 to 60 minutes is background, summary of the SIA, standards on internal audit, key messages coming out, and then of course each standard in detail to the extent possible. Now, internal audit as a subject itself is undergoing tremendous transformation. As a background to the SIA, we are seeing 4 or 5 key trends that are emerging, which are very relevant and they are disrupting the internal audit profession. First, of course, is the technology. The moment the internal auditor asks for data, he gets overload of data in the form of data dumps. Now, the auditor sits and wonders what he has to do with such a large overload of data and the number of digital information that is being generated on a day-to-day basis. So we have 2 specific standards, one on sampling and second on data analysis, which the internal auditor could benefit out of. So if they follow those 2 standards, they will learn and understand how to find meaning in the data. Because to become successful internal auditor, what is very important today is to tell the data story very, very effectively. So to tell the data story very effectively and to give insights to the management, I think what is relevant is to follow the sampling standard and the data analysis standard on SIA. Second is technology is running. Customer preferences are changing so fast, almost on a day-to-day basis. Software applications are being coded, recoded and changed on the basis of customer preferences. Just take an example of the banking scenario and just put your hand on your heart and you say that when last you have visited the bank branch or ATM, perhaps you would have forgotten that. Because the way business is happening today with the use of technology, auditor stands last in the queue. Customer has transacted and then the auditor comes once in a quarter or once in 6 months or at the end of the year. The trail of the transaction has disappeared. Systems are being developed in such a way that they are being done first time right each time. And transactions are happening at a very, very fast pace where audit trails for auditors are vanishing. There's a growing expectation gap between the performance of the auditor and the expectation of the board. There's a growing competency gap because of the technology disruption that is happening primarily, and zero loyalty on employees as well as on customer side. Now, the question that comes to my mind as a practitioner of internal auditor, ease of doing internal audit. Are we actually easing the process of doing internal audit? If we don't follow the standards, the answer is no. What is the baseline for internal auditors today? The only baseline available as a quality, as a benchmark in front of us is the standards on internal audit issued by ICAI. And I must compliment 21 excellent comprehensive standards issued that talk about not only the definition of internal audit, the concept of controls, internal controls, but also guide the internal auditor on a variety of subjects. And we'll quickly look at all those areas. So this is the rule book for the internal auditors. The standards are a compilation of basic principles governing internal audit, key concepts and definitions, standards on internal audit, which are the key rule book and guides, and finally the technical and guidance note. So this is the overall framework which internal auditors need to follow as per the internal audit standards code. Now, why these standards are so relevant and important to us today as internal auditors? One is to demonstrate performance to the board and to the audit committee, or to even showcase our performance to a peer reviewer or to an external third party. It could be any stakeholder. Today, internal audit report of listed entities is becoming a public information, available to a number of public sources. It could be credit rating agencies, it could be investors, of course, with the permission of internal auditors. So what is the baseline of performance of internal auditors? The baseline of performance is these 21 standards. If the internal auditor is able to follow these standards to the last mile in a consistent manner, he or she will be able to demonstrate with confidence that quality has been delivered, irrespective of the contents of the internal audit report. Of course, the contents have to be superlative. I'm not denying that. But the process and the journey of internal audit is very important. And if it is benchmarked with these standards on internal audit, you will be able to demonstrate and showcase your performance and quality effectively. These standards have taken a long time to develop through a lot of research, lot of compilation of best practices. The journey started as early as 2004, where the council created the Committee of Internal Audit. From there on, we have come a long way. 2008, 2013, 2018, these were all milestone periods and years in which the standards have got formulated, changed, subtracted. We have, about 21 standards recommended by the our Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and the Internal Audit Standards Board. So let's take a quick look at the summary. As on 1st July 2013, we had 18 standards. 4 got deleted. On the left-hand corner, you see the standards that got deleted. 7 were added. Standards as on date are 21. Standards that are modified in the last decade are 6. And standards that have not been changed or have stood the test of time are 8 standards. So in summary, we have 21. The standards that have got deleted are more or less submerged into standards or key concepts which have been fresh issued by the IASB. So basic principles governing internal auditor got deleted. Terms of internal audit engagement, internal control evaluation, and knowledge of entity. These all find mention. All these concepts have been rolled over into new standards. One very important standard that comes out is nature of assurance, which we will try to get into details today. The internal auditor always wonders that whether he is providing consulting output and services to the organization or is providing an assurance opinion to the organization. So depending on the nature of engagement, the internal auditor has to now decide whether he wants to be bracketed into assurance service provider by virtue of nature of assurance 110 SIA, or he's providing a report that is merely a high, medium, low rating report without an opinion to the audit committee and to the board. Other standards that have got added are internal control, managing the internal audit function, conducting overall internal audit planning, objective of internal audit, review and supervision of audit assignments, monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. Now, these are all compilations of best practices by the IASB. This is the summary chart of all the standards bifurcated into the nature of standards. So the first standard, starting with series 100 or 1, are key concepts and definitions, which are nature of assurance and internal control. Second, series 2 are internal audit management, which you see that there are 4 standards here. Then actual conduct of an audit assignment is series 3, and standards issued prior to July 1, 2013 that have not undergone a change have the original number nomenclature assigned to them. Standards that are yet to be issued are standards in series 5, 6 and 7 for other areas, specialized areas, and standards on quality control. So these are yet to be issued by the IASB, but the series has been allocated. What I will do today is that I will focus on the key messages coming out from the new standards and we will deep dive into a couple of other standards. So let's look at the key messages that are coming out of the revamped, revised governing principles as well as standards on internal audit. The first is the standards. The IASB believes that the standards will be implemented in a mandatory manner once the council notifies them on a phase-wise manner. First applicable to listed entities and thereafter to smaller entities. The next important message coming out is internal auditors have to apply their best judgment in implementation of SIs on a substance over form basis. So really what is important is the IASB wants the internal auditors to see the practicality of implementation, use their own judgment, professional judgment, their best judgment on how each situation they are facing in internal audit and how it can be benchmarked with SIs and implemented actually in spirit more than in letter. The compilation is there of SIs. From a practical perspective, practitioners have to use it, have to experience it, have to improve it over a period of time. And that is the spirit of SIA. The journey has to be continuous improvement. From a code of ethics standpoint, internal auditors, just like the statutory auditors, have to be absolutely independent, free from any biases such as personal favors, conflict of interest. There are a number of practical situations, that come up. Like say, for example, if there is a corporate house that has got an audit head appointed internally, and the audit head was the HR head in the previous avatar, then is that person conflicted from doing the internal audit of the HR function? Could be one question. If the internal audit had got the chief of internal audit had got any previous engagement, say for example, if it's a partner of a firm, and if the partner of the firm was earlier associated in creating the SOPs of the corporate entity, and then thereafter has become the internal audit engagement partner, would it be appropriate for him or her to actually go ahead and do the internal audit, since he was instrumental in designing the SOPs and systems of the organization? So these are some softer questions that one has to ask in terms of independence, bias, while formulating the point of view in terms of objectivity, fairness of approach and so forth. SIs in the revised avatar and even the earlier avatar always laid emphasis on the subject of risk assessment, evaluating the effectiveness of risk management, etc., doing risk-based internal audit planning approach. And that same is emphasized time and again in number of standards. The term risk management, risk assessment finds a mention, and rightfully so. So the entire approach has to be risk-driven as per the SIA. It no more can be a traditional approach of ticking in the box. The internal auditor has to do a basis while the internal audit activities are carried out. Internal audit, as per the standards, should provide risk-based assurance, good and high-quality counsel to the management, insights on governance, risk management, subject of internal controls, and compliances. Internal audit should use subject matter experts, should be committed to continuous improvement journey. Few other important messages applies to all members, whether in practice or employment, who are engaged on the internal audit assignment, whether it is the internal employee of the organization working in the internal audit function and is a chartered accountant, this standard would apply to them. Whether it is an audit firm, external firm to the company entity, again, these standards would apply. The internal auditor has to take a pick on the nature of assurance and type of report that is being issued, knowledge of client business, IA charter, communication protocols and audit committee oversight, letter of engagement and terms of contract to be clearly drafted, resourcing plan, analytical reviews. Internal auditor should be sensitive to multiple stakeholder needs. This is one important message. Internal auditor, as per the key conceptual framework on governing internal auditing activities, the IASB has said that the internal auditor should be sensitive to multiple stakeholder needs, meaning that the internal auditor should be far from forming biased opinion or passing personalized judgments on a situation. The internal auditor's job is to focus on improving systems, processes, governance, ethics, and risk management in the organization, should not point fingers towards individual or past judgments that are highly personalized. The viewpoint coming out of the internal audit report should be a balanced viewpoint, keeping in mind the sensitivity of stakeholder needs. Key decisions that are based on internal audit reporting should be recognized by the internal audit team. It could be in the area of procurement, technology, cyber security. Internal audit scope traverses the entire organization. So internal auditors should be much aware of the fact that the risks that are being identified, evaluated, commented upon have a bearing on the decision making made by the board and the audit committees. So that is what the key conceptual framework also talks about. Business and fraud risk assessment to be done mandatorily, should consider IT, information technology controls, the change management and several other aspects related to technology. The internal auditor should factor in the scope of work, should design a sampling plan aligned to the sampling standard. Legal compliance assessments and checklists should be developed on the basis of the directly applicable laws to the business. It could be GST, income tax, labor laws, it could be FEMA or direct regulatory compliances if it's a bank, RBI, if it's a listed entity, SEBI, LODR, etc. So what is the subject matter of compliance for the auditee should be evaluated by the internal auditor very, very effectively while he's formulating the scope of work, doing the risk assessment. Use of competent personnel and external experts. Again, very, very critical. Internal auditor should form an opinion at the beginning of the year while creating the internal audit budget and resource plan, whether the team members available are competent to carry out the risk assessment and the internal audit activities. Review of related party transactions, monitoring of prior period items, continuing control deficiencies, maintenance of working paper file, documentation, taking adequate backups, material departures from standards on internal audit to be disclosed in the report. So if there are any departures from standards on internal audit, the internal auditor has to disclose them in the report itself. Say for example, if the internal audit head or the internal audit engagement partner is conflicted and has to rescue himself from the exercise, it has to be adequately disclosed. Or if there is essential information critical to the completion of the internal audit exercise, say for example, if the source system that is generating evidences is not stabilized, right? Because the standard on collection of evidence says that the source evidence from where it is being collected should be reliable. If it is unreliable, such departure should be disclosed. So the internal auditor should carefully examine the applicability of all the standards to see where he or she is not able to conform to the applicability of the standard and performance of the standard, and then do a material disclosure on that. Content and format of the IA report, although the elements of the internal audit report are more or less recommended in the form of insights given in the standards. However, IASB very clearly says that content and format of IA report is a matter of professional judgment and choice of the internal auditor. So there is no straight-jacketed format that is prescribed for the internal audit report. Having said that, traditionally we see the key elements in the internal audit report in terms of objectives of internal audit, scope of work, the audit approach, the risk assessment methodology, the detailed observations, root cause analysis, audit ratings. It could be high, medium, low. It could be control effectiveness scores, etc. And then arriving at some kind of an opinion if warranted as an assurance report. There is tremendous emphasis on review and supervision. We will quickly look up the standard on review and supervision. This is important for all the people that are signing internal audit reports. What are the activities they have to review as a matter of first level, because it's a direct accountability established in the standards on internal audit for the person who's signing the internal audit report. So what are the review activities and what are the supervision activities to be carried out? There is a good indicative table annexure which I will share with you. Establishment of effective communication protocols between the auditors and auditees to ensure clarity and consensus on audit activities and reporting activities is prescribed by the standard. So we have to move away from the boxing matches that generally are played between the auditors and auditees on a quarterly basis to a situation where there is enough clarity and consensus, and also there are no surprises to the auditees. Because generally there could be some tendencies to take out observations at the last moment and give a surprise to the auditee with a bias in mind that, the auditee has not supplied information to me, so let me give him some kind of a pushback. That should be avoided. No surprises should be given. Everything should be clear and consensus should be developed. Communication of essential and critical information and independent validation of corrective action plans. Now, this is an important one here. Generally, the action taken report that happens on a revisit basis once in a year of previous year's findings, the standards say that there should be a validation of corrective action plans independent, at least once in a year, so that you are able to revisit those corrective action plans to see that what was recommended indeed stands water in the next year or not. Now let me do a fact check. Unfortunately, we don't have an opinion poll here, but a quick one to all of you. Work from home does not require modification of charters and appointment terms. True or false?
It's true, sir.
Yes. Work from home does require modification of charters and appointment terms in a big way, because the pandemic has completely disrupted the internal auditor's way of working, and all the appointment terms, charters, especially the physical verification which the internal auditor carries out. Now, in that situation, how to give assurance to the management and the statutory auditor that is relying on our work of internal auditor, especially in physical verification activity. So, there was a advisory issued by the institute as well on this subject, that the physical verification could be evidenced through video recording. So such modern techniques have to be adopted by internal auditors, and they should change their terms of reference and their charters. The next one, I think my co-speaker would be talking about, so I will skip this one. I'll go to the third one. Audit documentation can be prepared within 3 months of audit closure. True or false? So this is false. The standard on internal audit on documentation, there is a standard on internal audit on documentation which clearly says that audit documentation, when we talk of audit documentation, it primarily includes working paper, creation, management and review, should be done while the audit is in progress. For any reason, if it is not being done while the audit is in progress, the maximum allowable limit is 60 days. It cannot be 3 months or 90 days. Within 30 to 60 days, the standard talks about 60 days as a timeline. The audit documentation should be completed. Now, does the internal auditor's job include identification of liabilities? Yes, very much. It does include, especially in times, in these challenging times where we are seeing a lot of defaults, insolvencies, etc. happening across the board, across sectors. There is a lot more emphasis on the subject of liabilities, contingent liabilities, and the internal auditor's job does include, as part of the SIs, to look up the liabilities and the contingent liabilities, because his work is relied upon by the management as well as by the statutory auditors. So this is a snapshot of SI 350. review and supervision of audit assignments, which is a new important standards. This is a critical columnar annexure given at the end of the standard. So indicative list of review and supervision activities. Now this is very relevant to chartered accountants who are signing off internal audit reports. They have to look at this table and ensure that the review has happened in line with the standard. What were the audit objectives as per the engagement letter? Whether there is an audit plan in place, audit program in place, resource allocation, work allocation has happened on the risk priority basis, sampling procedures have been designed, documenting, evidencing performance of audit procedures, etc. and so forth. So there are a host of review activities here, and likewise there are supervision activities as well prescribed more or less on similar lines, but some important ones on the supervision side is reviewers' feedback to the audit team and its compliance. So the reviewer has to give a first-hand feedback to the internal audit team. Complex and technical audit issues requiring supervisors' guidance. So it could be matters around liabilities, valuation, disclosure, framing of recitals, etc. So wherever there is an interpretational issue, here the supervisor or the signing partner must consult either a peer within the firm or a peer outside the firm while formulating his interpretation and giving his internal audit opinion. Rationale for excluding draft observations from the audit reports should also be maintained in terms of justifications why draft observations that were there in the draft report have been dropped off. So it's a matter of supervision. So these are some important elements in terms of compliance with the standard on review and supervision of audit assignments. Now I'll come to a deep dive in terms of couple of standards. One is nature of assurance, which is a new standard. So here, where the internal auditor has to express an opinion in the internal audit report, he or she has to cite the nature of assurance 110 standard. This is in the nature of key concept. So what the standard says? The standard says that where the internal auditor can provide assurance or not has to be decided by the internal auditor on the basis of the expectation of the assurance user as well as the auditee. The assurance user could be the board, could be the audit committee, the auditee could be the CFO's office. So depending on the expectation, depending on the terms of reference and the way the scope of work has been drafted, the internal auditor has to decide and make up his mind whether he is going to be giving an assurance report or merely an internal audit report. Now, when he is making up his mind to give an internal audit assurance report, how does it differ from a normal internal audit report? The normal, usual internal audit report would end by giving a tabular summary of observations, doing a root cause analysis, and giving a high, medium, low rating to the observations. Assurance report would extend beyond that in terms of giving a conclusive outcome or a point of view or an opinion by the internal auditor that yes, the compliance has happened or not happened. Like let's take, for example, internal financial controls as a subject, where a lot of internal auditors are asked to do the testing of internal financial controls. And the statutory auditors and the board want a conclusive opinion of the internal auditor, whether internal financial controls are effective or not effective. So they want an assurance opinion from the internal auditor's function that internal financial controls are effective or ineffective, adequate or inadequate. So in such a situation where the expectation of the assurance user, that is the audit committee and the board, is very clear. They are saying that your scope of work is evaluating the adequacy and effectiveness of internal financial controls in the organization and forming a point of view and giving back a conclusive opinion to us on your point of view. So this goes beyond the traditional internal audit format, where the internal auditor is duty bound to then give an assurance opinion. So in such a situation, the internal auditor has to be sure of three elements prescribed in the nature of assurance standard. The first is what is the subject matter on which the opinion is desired. So it could be a regulatory circular, it could be a regulatory guideline or a prescription, it could be a section under a particular act, it could be a rule set under a particular act. What is the predefined criteria against that subject matter, and what is the conclusive outcome the internal auditor is going to give. So to extend the example of internal financial controls further, the subject matter is section 134(5), where clearly the Companies Act lays down what is internal financial control. The rules framed under the Companies Act also lay down prescriptive guidelines, and there is a guidance note issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So these are all subject matters. Now, what is the predefined criteria here? Predefined criteria could be the checklist and the risk and control matrix developed by the internal auditor to test the adequacy and effectiveness of the internal financial controls, and basis that he or she is able to give a conclusive outcome or opinion. So here the internal auditor has to look at subject matter, predefined criteria and conclusive outcome. So these are the basic things prescribed in the standard. Let's just summarize the standard here. Scope, which equals to subject matter, benchmark, which equals to predefined criteria, and sufficient and appropriate evidence pointing towards opinion making by the internal auditor. So if all these three items here on this slide are giving the confidence to the internal auditor that he can provide an assurance report, then he or she could actually reference this standard and provide the assurance. The next one is on internal control, 120. So here again, it's a very comprehensively designed and documented standard that provides the definition of the term internal control activities. The pictorial depiction of various internal controls is provided, which is reproduced here. Internal controls generally are high-level controls, pervasive to the entire organization. Control of controls known as entity-level controls. They could be merely internal controls such as policies, instruction books, guidelines, authority matrices. There could be internal financial controls. It could be in terms of financial closure of books of accounts, for example. It could be operational controls embedded in the procurement process or the HR hire to exit process, or it could be internal control over financial reporting. So in general, internal controls can be bifurcated into process controls, internal financial controls, or entity level controls, and all put together create the internal control environment and the internal control system of the organization. And the primary job of the internal auditor is to comment on the control environment and the internal control system of the organization to improve the risk management and governance stature of the organization. So then the standard also prescribes various other guidelines, which I am skipping. Then there is a standard 210 managing the internal audit function. So here this gives an overall framework and guideline in terms of what the internal audit function should do and what are the key elements in the function in terms of first and foremost is defining the overall objectives of internal audit. Then whether the internal audit department is well resource skilled, there is proper expertise available. Assignments are undertaken in a systematic, disciplined and professional manner. Quality of the work performed forms a sound basis for reporting. Work is conducted in conformance with the standards on internal audit. What are the key elements in the standard managing the internal audit function? There are 5 key elements. Internal audit function should have a policy and a standard operating procedure in place. It should have a resourcing plan and a budget. There should be monitoring of achievement of plans. Here the responsibility rests on the chief audit executive or head of audit or the audit engagement partner. Quality evaluation and improvement program on an ongoing basis of the internal audit function. And finally, there should be adequate documentation of all the activities that the internal audit department or function carries out, and also those activities that they are not able to carry out, and what are the risk factors emanating from those activities should be reported very clearly. For example, if the internal audit plan does not address the cyber security risk in a particular given year because of non-availability of resources, then the internal audit function should clearly disclose that to the audit committee, that the cyber security risk is not addressed by the internal audit function, and it's an open risk as far as internal audit function is concerned. So that should be documented and disclosed to the audit committee and to the assurance users, to the various stakeholders in the organization. Conducting the overall internal audit planning, standard 220. So here the planning process involves obtaining knowledge of the business of the client, establishing the audit universe. Audit universe could be into various types of units. It could be manufacturing facilities. It could be the budgeting process. It could be the SOPs of the organization. It could be the functional breakdown, financial statements. So depending on the overall audit universe of the organization, the internal auditor can do a risk ranking on the criticality of risks and the risk of failure, and basis that devise the internal audit plan with the objectives of the engagement and scope of the engagement, deciding the resource allocation on the risk priority, and finally preparing an audit plan. So this is prescribed in greater details in the standard. I'll not get into each and every element what is prescribed in the standard and leave it to you in the form of this presentation. Objective of internal audit 230, I think, is going to be covered by my co-speaker, so I'll be skipping this. Nitesh, just let me know when my time ends. Have I got more time to go?
Sir, yes, you have 18 minutes with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So there is, I'll skip this as well. Now, this is the overall planning process chart, which the internal auditor could follow, and is a waterfall, more or less prescribed by the standards as well. So having formulated the overall plan, could create the month-wise, unit-wise calendar, followed with a detailed audit program, including the checklist, which could include the risk and control assessment metrics, fraud risk assessment, supporting control questionnaires, overall requirement tracker, what is the analytical procedure to be used by the internal auditor, sampling plan, and then of course the review. Now let's look at the standard on internal audit evidence. The standard on internal audit evidence again is a critical standard. Here the internal auditor has to ensure that while the internal audit activity is being done, he or she understands the important characteristics of the audit evidence that needs to be collected. So the standard says that the evidence has to be sufficient in terms of quantity, the number of samples taken out of the population for review. The quality of the evidence has to be good, it has to be reliable. What is the form of the audit evidence, whether it is digital or it is physical, scanned images, and the source from where the audit evidence is collected has to be authentic. And here the standard on review and supervision comes in, where it is expected that the manager, the audit manager, does a first level of review, the partner would do a second level of review. So there is filtration and evaluation of audit evidence that is collected through inspection, observation, inquiry, confirmation, computation, re-performance, and analytical review. So these are the techniques for collecting the internal audit evidence, and these have to be reviewed for the source, for authenticity, the form, reliability, and the quality in which it is being collected, and then linked from a working paper perspective to the final audit observation. So audit evidence should ideally be disclosed in the form of annexures to the internal audit report, very clearly highlighting what has been missed out in the transaction or in the system design and what is the evidence accompanying that. So this is the standard 330 on internal audit documentation. Here the standard says that all the important internal audit activities, be it the engagement terms, be it the planning sheets, the memorandum of planning, be it the risk assessment sheets, working papers, site visits, and number of other audit activity related things that we carry out as internal auditors should all be documented in an organized manner and in a timely manner within 60 days at best of completion of the audit assignment, should be archived, should be retained. The internal audit documentation and evidence is a critical thing as far as auditees are concerned, clients are concerned. If it is a regulated entity, public interest entity, or a listed entity, the obligation on the internal auditor increases furthermore to retain such documents, and the overall institute prescribes a time period of about 9 years to retain such documentation, and mandatorily under the Companies Act, Income Tax Act, I think the period is 7 to 8 years. Internal auditors could retain it for 9 to 10 years at least at a minimum in terms of critical audit documentation and files. So these are the important ones: internal audit charters, plans, procedures performed, etc. Conclusions drawn. We covered review and supervision of audit assignments briefly, so I'm not getting into that again. Maybe move on to 360, communication with management. So here the standard prescribes SI 360 that there should be effective two-way communication so that there is clarity and consensus building between the auditor and the auditee. Now, what are the elements here? The standard says that first and foremost, the communication protocols should be in writing between the auditor and the auditee. That what is the nature of communication that is going to happen. Say, for example, the internal auditor, when he kickstarts the internal audit assignment, the nature of communication could be a verbal presentation. However, it would be better that having made the verbal presentation to the auditees while kickstarting the internal audit assignment, to follow it up with a written communication so that there is sufficient clarity in the auditee's mind as to what is the approach the internal audit team is going to follow. So a written communication process and protocol with the management at various stages, whether it is at the stage of designing the internal audit plan, doing a risk assessment, communicating audit results, doing a status review, should all be documented and exchanged with the management in a written format. This standard also talks about essential information. Essential information is a key element in the communication process. So say, for example, if you are not able to undertake a particular audit activity on account of the pandemic situation, say physical verification of inventory or physical verification of cash, or you're not able to verify the original titles to fixed assets or tangible assets for a particular reason. So in those situations, this is the essential information disclosure that needs to go to the assurance user or to the audit committee from the internal auditor's desk. So those essential information and critical information should be communicated as part of the communication protocols established with the management. So matters to be communicated include internal auditors' roles and responsibilities in terms of the engagement, planned scope and timing of internal audit, significant findings from the internal audit, establishing the communication process, the form of communication, the nature of escalation, timing of communication, etc. So all these important elements are prescribed under the standard. We'll come to 370, reporting results. Now, this is the interesting standard here. I think most of us would be referring to this standard quite regularly, would be using this standard. So there are a lot of reporting practices as far as internal audits are concerned. There are three verticals in which you can divide the reporting practices. One is the traditional internal audit report that we generally see, which is served to the audit committee and to the board of directors. Second is the insight report, where the internal auditor is not giving an internal audit finding, however, has analyzed the data in the organization and is presenting the data in the form of a dashboard. So that is insight reporting. And third is exception or outlier or fraud reporting, where the internal auditor has identified certain things, certain outliers, and is communicating that to the management in the form of an exception or as an outlier or as a flash report. So you have to carefully choose the format in which you have to report the results of internal audit, whether you are giving insight to the management where there is no need of a management feedback. Where there is a traditional internal audit report and finding, there it's a two-way communication. You have made a finding, you need a management response, you need to evaluate the corrective action plan, you need to do a root cause analysis, you need to see what is the risk implication, quantify the risk implication, quantify the financial impact, etc. The form and content of the report, as I said earlier, is not prescribed under the SIA, but the key elements are prescribed. And one of the key elements that is prescribed in reporting results standard on internal audit is that the output of internal audit has to be factually correct. In no circumstances the internal auditor can present an incorrect output to the management. Output that is incorrect and is not timely, goes against the objectives of internal audit. Also, preferably, the audit observations should be summarized in the form of a key executive summary and what are the key corrective action plans. And then finally, what is the nature of assurance that we discussed as per the earlier standard, whether it is actually an audit opinion to be communicated to the management or it is a rating score or a control effectiveness scale that is being communicated to the management. Monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues, SIA 390. Now here there are 3-4 important elements. First is that there should be proper monitoring and closure of open issues from prior audits. There should be independent validation of corrective actions taken by the auditee, escalation of any concerns in case of delays in closure of issues, timely reporting of status to those charged with governance. So these are critical elements prescribed under the standard where there should be a proper tracking of action taken, independent validation of actions. It means that we should not only take the feedback from the management that they have implemented a recommendation, but we should independently validate whether those recommendations have been actually implemented and give a feedback to the audit committee. Escalation of any concerns in case of delays in closure of issues and timely reporting of status to those charged with governance. The key element here is to report continuing control deficiencies, which are very much required by regulated entities and prescribed by regulations also, like LODR and several other important regulations, where the CEO and the CFO's office have to give a certificate on the effectiveness of internal controls. So if there are open risk items in the form of unimplemented internal auditors observations and recommendations, then those have to be flagged off in the subsequent periods as continuing control deficiencies.
Sir, there are certain questions also. So can we take them now?
Yeah, please. Would be happy to take them.
Yeah. So the first question is, would the SIA, that is Standard of Internal Audit, apply to internal auditors in the employment of the organization, or should they go by the policy of the organization? This question has been asked by PN Subramaniam ji.
Yeah. So thanks for asking this interesting question. Anybody who's a chartered accountant and is regulated by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in the profession of internal audit, whether a corporate employee or a partner or an employee of a CA firm, has to comply with these standards. The standards say all members, and it further says members in practice as well as in employment. So whoever is a member of the institute will have to comply.
Sir, second question is, in case of an entity where internal audit function is not mandatory, has appointed an external firm, and the entity is not serious in giving responses, which are easy and expensive, what action should we take?
So this is a common problem across various organizations and sectors, where sometimes internal audit, where it is not mandatorily applicable to an organization, they take it little easily in terms of complying with the internal auditor's observations, recommendations. Here, my suggestion would be to build a rapport with the audit sponsor, because someone is bearing the cost of internal audit, and whoever is bearing the cost of internal audit will be seriously interested in getting a return on investment. So the audit sponsor should be contacted, could be a chair of the audit committee, could be the chairman of the company. In most of the cases where they are promoter-driven entities that I have worked with personally, they get very excited with internal audit findings. So someone who's bearing the cost of internal audit will certainly respond to this question in a much better way than me.
Basically, who is bearing the cost is the main person who will be
The main
answerable to
person,
this.
and he wants value out of internal audit exercise. So
Exactly, sir. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sir, one more question is SIA 320. How to define audit evidence methodology? Who defined this, sir?
Yeah. So the standard itself has defined that how you have to capture the audit evidence and what are the techniques of capturing the audit evidence. So the auditor has to merely follow the standard. Like say, for example, if you are reviewing the physical environment of an organization and there are CCTV cameras, so your working papers and your audit plan should clearly mention that there are 40 cameras, out of which we are taking evidence from 10 sample cameras, and this is the period for which the evidence is taken, and this is the rollback evidence on the logs, etc., and who has provided the evidence. So, the techniques of collecting audit evidence, whether it is inspection, observation, computation, re-performance, etc., has to be seen which is the technique that you can use, and whether the source of that evidence collection is authentic or not. So if the CCTV camera is installed properly and in proper hands, in an authorized person's hands, you can very well rely on that as audit evidence. So all these things have to be documented correctly.
Thank you, sir. We don't have any more questions as on now. And everybody is asking for your presentation because the presentation is very nicely, you have framed it very nicely, sir.
Sure. Sure, my pleasure. So I can share the presentation. And I think my time is up, so it's 7. So
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice deliberation. In last 1 hour, you have explained it very well about the standards of internal auditing, and every must will be aware of these fact that there are a lot of technical changes which has been happened due to this COVID in this recent last 2 years. Thank you so much for joining us with us.
Most welcome. Most welcome. My pleasure. Thank you. Chandrakant ji, and thank you,
Nitish. Sir.
Thank you. And
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, sir, please. Sir, at the top of the bar, yes, it's there. Yeah, thank you. Now it's time to introduce the second learner speaker of the session, and that is CA Ankur Gupta ji. CA Ankur is a qualified chartered accountant with more than 10 years of experience in internal audits, risk assessment, process improvement, internal control evaluation, SOX readiness, and preparation of standard operation practice. Ankur has around 3 years of experience in the internal audit team in one of the largest cement manufacturing companies in India. Ankur has been part of developing standard operating practice for more than 10 companies from different sectors. Ankur has significant exposure in handling internal financial control (IFC) review at major manufacturing clients in line with the requirements of Companies Act 2013. Ankur has authored various articles for the Institute on internal audit methodologies. Ankur has significant experience in providing process improvement and internal control evaluation services to various sectors such as FMCG, pharma, cement, consumer electronics, energy and resources, and textile, among others. Ankur has been part of international assignments in USA, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Egypt. I, on behalf of the Internal Audit Board, welcome Ankur Ji for the second session, and he will be taking the session on the topic SIA 230 and 240. So now I request Ankur Ji to kindly proceed with it.
Thank you, Parashar Ji. Just wanted to check my sound is fine.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thank you, Parashar Ji, for the kind introduction, and thanks a lot, Chandrakant Ji, as well, for helping us with this session. And lastly, thank you to the IASB, the Standards Board. Has been very active in the last 1.5 years and 2 years, and especially thanks to COVID, we are able to do more sessions virtually, and that is, I think, really helping everyone. And I think the focus on internal audit from the institute, and also the zeal which I'm seeing from everyone in the institute, and also the excitement from the members is absolutely fantastic, because I've spent a decade in internal audit, and that is something I'm very passionate about. And it's very nice to see that people are now seeing internal audit as a very exciting subject. And I see a lot of young CAs also who are willing to make their long-term careers in internal audit, which is great. Also would like to thank my co-speaker, Josefa sir. Obviously, he's one of the veterans of the internal audit, and it's great to share the training session and be a co-speaker with him. So I'll just share my screen for the presentation. Just a second. Yeah, I think my screen should be visible.
Yeah, it is visible, sir.
Okay, so in the previous session, we obviously saw some of the summary of the various standards which are being issued by the Institute on Internal Audit, and what's the status on different standards. And also, there's a very good brief about some of the standards, how they apply and what are the objectives of those standards. As far as my topic goes, it is obviously focusing on these two standards, particularly SIA 230 objectives of internal audit and 240 using the work of an expert. Now, both these standards are very important. Obviously, all these standards are very important, but then these two in particular are interesting standards, because the first one is where you set the baseline of internal audit, which is the objective of internal audit. How do you define what is the objective of internal audit? What is the standard which applies to it? What are the guidelines around defining the boundaries of internal audit? Who defines those boundaries and things like that? The second standard is using the work of an expert. In today's time, this is again a very important standard, because the way businesses are changing, and especially in the last couple of years, what has happened, the way businesses has changed, the way new technologies are coming, the way new ways of working are coming. It has become very important for internal audit to, up its game. And it can happen, obviously, one, by upskilling yourself, which obviously all of us are always doing, but then also collaborating with others. And that is where using the work of an expert comes in. It cannot be expected that the internal auditor knows everything. So there will be times where they will need help. They will need services of an external party or some expert. And that is where this standard comes into play. That, what are such situations in which you use experts? How do you use them? What kind of documentation you maintain, and what kind of independence do you ensure? And that is why both these standards are very important. What I'll do today in this presentation, what I'm covering is, as far as SIA 230 is concerned, that is objectives of internal audit. I will be discussing about the purpose of defining the objectives. Why do you define the objective of internal audit? Then what is the scope and objective of the internal audit function in large? And obviously the standard in itself, and the Institute has done a wonderful job in defining the standards. Those are clear, summarized standards. And if you read through those standards, it's very easy to understand them. But in my slides, what I've done is I've sort of, used them in a a tabular form and presented them in a summarized form. But what I would always recommend all of you is to go through the standards also once and read them in detail. It is not something which is very difficult, and you would really enjoy reading the standards because it will give you end-to-end purview of the standards. But obviously, I'll be summarizing them. And then from the objectives perspective, I'll be speaking briefly also on the components of a typical internal audit charter and the components of a typical engagement letter. For those of you, for them, these terms are new. I'll obviously explain in my subsequent slides that what's an internal audit charter, why do we need an engagement letter, what kind of things do which comes in in an engagement letter. As far as SIA 240 is concerned, using the work of an expert, the baseline which I'm going to talk about is what is the requirement of appointing an expert and the purpose around it. How do we evaluate the work done by the expert? What does the standard talk about evaluation of the work by an expert, and how do you maintain independence and objectivity and the qualification credentials of the expert? I have also mentioned some of the use cases where you could use the services of an expert. It can be endless, but I've given some illustrative list, and I'll share with you some of the examples where I have seen experts being used, or I have personally been part of engagements where some experts were used, and how did we manage that. So first of all, SIA 230 objectives of internal audit. Now, if you look, in the previous presentation also, we were talking about this, that as far as internal audit is concerned, the law does not mandate, external agency only can be an internal auditor. You could have in-house employee as also internal audit function. And a lot of big companies, in fact, most of the large companies, in fact, have in-house internal audit departments. I also was part of earlier in-house internal audit department. And this standard applies to both, whether you're an outsourced agency doing the work for your client, or you're an internal auditor working as an employee of the company. Obviously, as far as the section 138 is concerned, internal audit is mandated for few of the companies. And in those companies, the objectives and the scope and the approach are primarily decided by the audit committee. In areas where internal audit is not mandated by the law, but still the companies go for internal audit, most of the times the objectives and the scope are defined by the, maybe the promoters or the chairman who is appointing the internal auditor. So what is the purpose of defining the objectives of internal audit? What happens is, the objectives help to establish the operating parameters within which the internal audit functions and what is the overall internal audit agenda. It is very important to define those objectives, because tomorrow internal audit, if someone asks for what internal audit is accountable, answerable, then there should be some definition around it, some objective around it. So the first point, documenting the formation and functioning of internal audit activity in terms of the outsourced internal audit arrangement. So as I spoke about, it can be in-house internal audit, it can be outsourced internal audit department. But then you have to document the formation and the functioning. In case of in-house audit department, what is the structure? Who is the IA head? Whom does it report to? In case of an outsourced agency, who is the partner? Who is the manager? How does the arrangement work? How does the communication work? The second is providing clarity to the internal auditor and stakeholder regarding the nature of internal audit. How the internal audit will function, what will be the boundaries of internal audit, what is the scope areas of internal audit. All these comes part of the objectives of defining the objectives of internal audit. Then third, I feel this is the most important point, that ensuring the linkage between what is expected of the internal auditor and how those expectations can be met. Today, if we see, there's a lot of, question on internal auditors, that whether they are doing their role correctly or not. The audit committee, promoters, the management is asking those questions to internal audit. The expectations are going up again and again, because the expectations are not only from the perspective of providing assurance to the management, but the management is also expecting internal audit to come up with some sort of advice and recommendations and best-in-class practices, cost savings and things like that. So to match those expectations and to ensure that how do we document how those expectations will be met, you need to define the objectives of internal audit. And fourth is provide better understanding on certain key operational areas like accountability, authority, what is the roles and responsibility. If you are an internal audit department, you can only be held accountable if you have been provided adequate authority or not. And that is where defining the objectives become very important. And that is why it is said that even if you're an in-house internal audit department, you should have some sort of a IA charter or some sort of a document which defines the boundaries, roles, responsibilities, and accountability of internal audit. So this is the slide which spoke about the objective of internal audit. Now, what is the requirement of the standard? Now, what the requirement of the standard is that the objectives and operating parameters are formally recorded in any of these two documents. First is the internal audit charter, which is primarily designed for in-house team of internal audits and its stakeholders. So the IA charter and most of the matured internal audit departments, in-house internal audit department would have a IA charter defined. What does the IA charter do? It tells that how does the in-house internal audit team function? How does it communicate with its stakeholders? Who are those stakeholders? It is the role and responsibility of internal audit department and what kind of authority the audit committee is providing to that internal audit department. So that internal audit charter is very important. If you're working in an in-house internal audit department, you should always have a IA charter, even if your team is small, even if you do not have too many people. An IA charter should be there because that is what defines the baseline of your department. It is quite similar to, we tell, most of our departments that do you have a procurement policy? Do you have a sales policy? It is quite similar to that. And do we have a IA charter or not? What defines our department? So that is the IA charter. The P part is the engagement letter. Now, this is engagement letter or contract or service order. These are things which come into picture when there is a formal agreement which is signed with the outsourced internal audit service provider. So if you're working in a professional firm and you are delivering internal audit to a client, then what is the document which defines the scope, the responsibilities, the fees, and other sort of things? That is the engagement letter. So no work should be done without that engagement letter. One, obviously, that's a contract, so that helps you from a contracting perspective. And second, it also defines the scope and the boundaries of internal audit. So tomorrow, if there is any confusion around, whether something was in scope or not, what was the audit period, what was the timeline of audit and things like that, all those should be part of your engagement letter. So engagement letter should be drafted very, very meticulously. Now, I've also added some of the key notes from the standards, which should be brought to the notice. The first one is, it is the duty of Chief of Internal Audit to have in place a written IA charter. I spoke about it, that whoever is the internal audit head or the Chief of Internal Audit, he should ensure that there is a IA charter which is documented and that is approved ideally by the audit committee. The Chief of Internal Audit shall also ensure that this charter is approved by also those who are charged in governance. That can be internal audit, or that can be the audit committee, or that can also be the board. So that IA charter should be approved. It cannot be that the chief of IA himself makes an IA charter and says this is what I'm going to follow. He has to get that approved. And then it should be periodically reviewed by the chief of internal audit and the engagement partner. Because what happens is that a lot of times businesses change, the structure changes, the scope changes. So the IA charter and engagement letter should be periodically reviewed, maybe once a year or something like that. Quite similar to what we recommend in our IA reports to management, saying that boss, every year you have to review your SOPs and policies. Similarly, in some cases, both of the above documents may exist. Now, one question might come that can both these documents exist? Yes, obviously they can exist, because today most of the big organizations are going for a co-sourcing model where they have an in-house internal audit team also, and then some part of the review they have also outsourced. Or there are instances where there is just one IA head who is reporting to the audit committee and managing the work internally. Rest all the field work and audit and everything is outsourced. There might be a situation that the resources are externally taken only from a lone staff perspective, and the managers and the managers and the IA heads of the client are working on the reports given by the external firm. So whatever is the arrangement, that should be documented in that engagement letter. And then whatever power and the authority the in-house team enjoys, that should be part of the IA charter. So both these documents can exist. Now, the scope and objectives, they vary. They depend upon the size and structure of the entity, the requirements of the management, and mainly what those charged with governance. And that is why it is said that whenever you pick up any internal audit engagement also as an external firm, you should not cut, copy, paste the IA scope, even if the companies are similar or same natured. You should always go back to the audit committee, to the management, and ask them what is their expectations from the internal audit. Because that is what will define the objective and scope of internal audit. But some of the basic and the routine scope and objectives of IA functions can be number one is monitoring of internal control. That is the prime objective that IA function will be assigned the specific responsibility to review the monitoring and recommending improvement in internal control wherever possible. The second is obviously examination of the financial and operating information. That is what IA does day in and day out. It identifies, measures, classifies, and report the financial operating information, and also makes those inquiries and then tests the transactions and the balances and does all the substantive procedures. So examination of the financial and operating information becomes the second important criteria. Third, and nowadays very important, is review of the compliance with laws, because today the audit committee is taking confirmation and the board is taking information from the management that all laws are being complied with, and basis that they are giving a certification. So the internal audit is a function which is charged with that responsibility usually, that they also review the compliance to various laws, and if any laws are not being complied with, they bring that up to the notice of the management and the audit committee. Then the fourth is governance. Internal audit may also be told to ensure that the governance process in the organization is complete and is effective. Similarly, risk management. In a lot of companies, the risk management perspective, that is ERM, enterprise risk management, and things like that, those are being managed by the internal audit function, because those are the ones who are experts as far as the risk is concerned. And lastly is the review of operating activities, which is again becoming very important nowadays, where organizations are expecting us to comment on whether the operating activities are being carried out in an economic and efficient manner, and things like cost saving and stuff like that are coming into picture. The next point that I had was typical IA charter. Now, one question which would come is, how do you define a IA charter? And obviously, if you Google up examples of IA charter, there would be a lot of sample IA charters which will be there from where you can take up ideas. But typically, these aspects should be covered. First is mission and vision of the IA function. You have to indicate the long-term view of IA function. What is the mission and vision around it? What is the purpose and objective of internal audit? For the objective part, you can take examples from the previous slide and define those objectives of the internal audit department. The third and most important is the reporting structure independence. The IA department, whether it is in-house, external, it has to be independent. Even the in-house department has to be absolutely independent. And for that, you need to define the reporting lines. Usually, the internal audit department should always functionally report to the audit committee. It should not functionally report to the CFO or the CEO, because then independence may be hampered. And that is why the reporting structure should be defined. Max administrative reporting should be given as far as the CEO, CFO is concerned. The scope and approach, how does the internal audit function? What is the scope? What will the approach they follow? The accountability and authority. So in most of the charters, if you see, the language which would be written is that the internal auditor may be held accountable for certain developments beyond basic assurance, such as improving the internal controls. But then also authority is given. Like, for example, in one of the charters, I've seen that the authority was given that the internal auditor has free right to any information, any document, any IT information available in the company. That is the authority which is provided through the IA charter. So whenever someone asks you that, who gives you the authority of asking for this document, it is the IA charter which gives you that authority. Roles and responsibility, what are our roles, responsibility? And the last is quality assurance. Even if you're an in-house internal audit department, you have to document what is the quality assurance parameters which you are following. And that is where this quality assurance part comes into picture, and you have to document that you will be complying with SIAs. There will be a peer review mechanism. So these are the basic aspects which you cover in IA charter. Again, to summarize, very important to have an IA charter if you are part of an in-house internal audit department. As far as a typical engagement letter is concerned, if you are signing up an engagement letter with a client, some of the things are pretty similar. You design the purpose and objective, you design the independence part. Scope and approach is obviously very important, because there will obviously be a fee element as far as the engagement letter is concerned, and that is directly linked to the scope. So you have to define the scope very nicely so that tomorrow there is no confusion around the scope of IA. Roles and responsibilities, limitations have to be documented, very important, because see, today a lot of question is being asked from the internal auditors if anything goes wrong. So the limitations need to be documented, and what are the limitations of that internal audit. We spoke about recently about the things like physical verification not being carried out and stuff like that. Those limitations have to be documented in EL if possible. And obviously things like what is the ownership of working papers? Is it the ownership of the firm carrying out the internal audit, or it has to be passed on to the client? Those things need to be documented. And lastly, obviously the termination of arrangement, that how will that arrangement get terminated? That also need to be part of the engagement letter. So before I jump into 240, just to summarize, it can be two ways. 230 works in two ways. One is IEA charter, engagement letter. Both these documents important to design the scope and objective as far as internal audit is concerned. Now, SIA 240, using the work of an expert. Now, you would ask, why is this standard so important? It is important because in today's time, businesses are changing like anything. 10 years back, we did not have companies like Uber. We did not have, Ola. We did not have, things like Zomato and Swiggy and stuff like that. The IT technology transformation which has happened in the last few years has been phenomenal. We have daily new technologies, new type of companies coming in. Even the traditional companies, the way they are harnessing new technologies, developing artificial intelligence, bots are being, developed. I have seen at my clients, bots are being implemented for things like bill verification and reconciliation, stuff like that. So internal audit needs to keep pace to those things. We cannot do internal audit in a traditional manner, and that is why the appointing the expert comes into picture. So who's an expert? Expert is a person or an entity, can be association of a person or a firm, possesses certain special skills along with some years of experience. So simple. It's an expert in a particular field. He has years of experience, and he is just part of their engagement to do that particular role. Why are those appointed? They are appointed to help complete part of the internal audit assignment, where the required skills are not available. You cannot say that, we will have all the skills. A chartered accountant is different from an engineer. Though we know a lot about engineering, maybe, but we cannot do things which maybe a civil engineer can do, which maybe a mechanical engineer can do. So there are, limitations to the kind of knowledge that we have as internal auditors. That is where you appoint experts. Now, how can these experts assist? They can assist in giving us the technical know-how and their expertise in complex areas. There are some examples like IT, civil, electric, mechanical engineering, banking, oil and gas industries and stuff like that. Or maybe a specialized discipline, something like forensics or taxation. Or, for example, let's say tomorrow I'm doing an internal audit where there is a huge GST angle. Now, I might have a basic knowledge on GST, but then if the materiality involved is so high and the value involved is so high, I might have to get a taxation expert on board, a GST expert on board. And there's nothing wrong in that, because that will ensure that the opinion that I give is perfect. And the audit committee also will be happy that, okay, fine, some expert has given that opinion. And these are the areas where you get the experts on board. So what is the purpose of using the expert? And I spoke about it. One is obviously the technical assistance and support from competent experts. Internal audit team might not have the necessary knowledge, and the time it will require to build that knowledge might be very high. So it would make sense to get that expert onboarded. But then, having said that, the work performed has to be in conformance with the applicable pronouncement. So if you are using an expert, the expert also should work in in conformance with the IEA standards. There are some IEA procedures which are conducted in specialized areas, and to ensure quality standards, we might have to use the experts. And what that also does, it makes the outcome of the IEA work more credible. For example, if I'm doing a project review, doing an internal audit of a large project being carried out, if I use a civil engineer, if I use a mechanical engineer, and I have them do the work measurements or do the reconciliations, then after that, giving the IEA report or giving assurance also that everything is fine, I'll be more comfortable in giving that, because I'll have an expert who has double checked those things. Now, having said that, how do you ensure that the independence and objectivity of the expert is maintained? Look, finally, even if you use the expert, he's only there for part of the internal audit. finally, you are answerable to the audit committee and the management. So you have to ensure that the independence and objectivity is maintained. The first one is the appointing and supervising authority. So, you have to ensure that the appointing and supervising authority of that expert, that is independent. If I'm doing an audit of let's say procurement, and I need an expert for some of the specialized area, and if the person who is being audited, the head of procurement, he himself is recommending some expert to me, then obviously the independence will get hampered. So I have to be careful in those things. Second is employee of the company or external service provider. See, usually external professional would have more independence than an employee of the company. But having said that, there's nothing wrong in using the employee of the company also as an expert. But then it has to be independent. You cannot use an expert from the same department which you're auditing, because obviously there will be no independence there. So that professional judgment has to be taken by the internal auditor. The relationship of the expert with the company is also very important. If there is any existing relation that the expert has with that company, then the independence may be hampered. If let's say he is already doing other work with that company, and he's already a vendor with that company, and then if you're using him in the internal audit also, obviously the independence might get hampered. So you have to be careful in that. And then the personal interest also, if that employee is maybe a shareholder of the company, or his relatives are employees of that company and things like that, that's a personal interest. So those checks need to be made before you get an expert onboarded. Ideally, you should ensure that he does not have any relationship existing or in the past with the entity being audited, so that the objectivity and the independence is maintained. Qualification and credentials. See, finally, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are responsible for the work which has been done by the expert. We cannot say to the audit committee tomorrow something was wrong, that look, hey, it was done by the expert of the company, by the expert which I have just appointed, and I do not have any say on the work which has been done by him. So I am responsible for the work which is being carried out by the expert. So I have to ensure that he is qualified and the credentials are top notch. So I have to confirm the education professional qualifications. I have to do that background check. I cannot just blindly sign up anyone to do that work, because see, finally a lot of confidential information might also get passed on to him. So I have to apply my professional judgment. I have to take details of instances and nature of similar past engagements. So it's quite similar to the client. When the client appoints an external firm, it ensures that the external firm has relevant credentials. So similarly, if you are ongoing appointing an expert, you have to ensure that those details are being captured by us. And lastly, also ensuring that the self-certification of the expert has to be taken by us. All these criteria are important to ensure that the independence of that expert is maintained, the quality and the credentials are of the highest nature. And also the using the work of an expert, ideally if you're working in an arrangement where you are external firm and you're appointing a expert who is not your employee and you are getting him from some other agency or from outside, you should always disclose that to the management and the client also. That's the best practice, because they should know that someone from the third party is coming and visiting their premises, or having a look at their documentation. So to summarize, the requirement is that internal audit should make an independent determination, assess technicality and complexity of the subject, do the risk assessment and comparison of expertise available within the audit IA team to conduct a quality audit. Because see, what happens is there are times where you might have the in-house capabilities. In that scenario, it is a best practice to use your in-house team only. But wherever it is not possible, you go for an expert. You do a independent evaluation of the qualification criteria, and then you define the scope and objectives. See, finally, it is like a subcontracting. It is like giving work from your own work to someone else. So you have to define the complete scope and approach. You have to design his audit objective. You have to define the requirement. You have to define all the assumptions and the extent of access which is required wherever you are using the work of an expert. And lastly, the most important point, IA should retain ultimate responsibility for IA conclusion opinions. Whatever work the expert is doing, you have to have a review mechanism around it. You have to review it, ensure that it is correct, the figures given are perfect, and then ensure that the opinion which is going to the board or the audit committee is not incorrect. We cannot say that if I'm using the work of an expert, I don't take any responsibility around it. Evaluating the work of an expert, which I was just talking about. So you do a detailed review of the reporting and finding of the expert. You check the extended thoroughness of the procedures completed. Is there any scope limitations or hurdles which were faced? Then, such hurdles should be brought into the picture. It should be part of the report. So you should make that inquiry with the expert that if there was something which was not provided to him or he was not able to fulfill his work, then you document that as part of your work. You review certain work papers to understand the basis of significant observations. Now, one thing which might come up that you don't have the technical capabilities which that expert has, but then you can always do a review of his work paper to understand whether he has understood the process or not, and whether he has carried out adequate due diligence or not before coming up with the observations. So that review mechanism has to be there, and it should be in harmony with the rest of the IA report. Let's say if I'm giving a IA report of inventory, and some part of physical verification has been done by an expert. My complete IA report is in a different format. He's giving in a different format. I am using terms like high, medium, low. He's using terms like critical, significant, and things like that. That should not happen. It should be in complete harmony, because the reader of the report, he should not feel that he's reading two different reports. Also, in exceptional cases, conducting additional procedure, engaging other expert may be required to resolve inconsistency. See, if the expert comes up with something major, but then you are not 100% sure about it, then you might have to appoint another expert just to validate the work that he has performed. So it can be tricky, but then that can be done in cases where the expert has come up with really high significant observations. As far as documentation is concerned, see, one rule which I always tell everyone, that not documented is not done. And this is part of most of the other SIAs also, that you have to document all your audit procedures. And there's nothing different as far as using the work of an expert is concerned. So what you do is you document how those requirements of the expert were validated. How did you validate the independence and objectivity of the expert? How did you verify the qualifications? Everything which is there in the standard, you have to document it. You have to document what procedures did you perform to define the scope. And then you give a summary of the complete review which you have done to ensure the quality and reliability of the work completed. So right from the requirement of an expert to managing the expert's work, to ensuring the quality of the work, to ensuring the review mechanism, you have to completely document it as part of your internal audit work papers. Now, I have just given some illustrative lists. Now, this is not something which is part of the standard, but just for the discussion purpose, that you would ask what kind of instances where experts can be used, or it can be n number of instances. But these are some instances where I have typically seen experts being used nowadays. First is physical verification. Now, let's say if you're doing a physical verification in a coal mine, it is obviously not possible for us to, count the stock of coal from the traditional methods. So there are methods like total station, 3D scanners and stuff like that, which are used nowadays. Now, we might not be experts as far as using these methods are concerned. And that is where you rely on such experts. So if you're an internal auditor and the scope of the engagement includes giving assurance on physical verification of inventory of something like coal, you should tell this to the client that, hey, I'll have to bring in an expert to do this work, and this is what the arrangement will be, because that is something which probably I cannot do. Similarly, information technology, we do a lot of reviews around IT, and a lot of our base data is based upon information which is coming out of ERPs, SAP, Oracle. So checking the IT configuration is also very important. That is where you sometimes have to have SAP and Oracle experts onboarded to ensure that IT configurations are reviewed. Cyber reviews, if there are risks which the audit committee has come up around hacking or cyber controls and cyber security, then for us, maybe as internal auditors, it might be difficult to do those reviews. We maybe can do part of it. So then you get a cybersecurity expert onboarded to do those kind of things. Plant maintenance, this is one of the areas which is usually part of IA scope in most of the manufacturing industrial organizations. Now, as far as plant maintenance is concerned, as internal auditors or maybe as chartered accountants, we can do almost everything. But then there may be some specific issues like whether maintenance plan is proper or not, whether the schedules are proper or not, where you might need help of mechanical or electrical engineers. Capex reviews, if your client is going for an expansion or there are certain projects which you are reviewing, you might need help of specific civil engineers, to carry out things like work measurement, reconciliation, comparison with BOM, quality of work, whether, adequate BIS is being applied or not, and things like that. So that is where you bring in civil engineers into play. Sometimes health, safety, and environment is also something part of our scope. Most of the times we rely on company SOPs and checklists, but then we have specific experts, who are experienced in such reviews, and they come on board to help us out, in such reviews. Lastly, industry level. Sometimes for specific industries, we spoke about oil and gas, banking, chemical industries. To do certain complex reviews, you might need experts from that industry itself to help you out. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the review and the expectation from the client and the audit committee. But then there might be a situation where you would need specific industry, specific experts who would come on board to give you that comfort around the procedures being followed by the management. So this was the illustrative list of experts. It can go on and on. There can be other areas where experts can be used. And to summarize, I would just like to say that as far as SIA 230 is concerned, we spoke about it. It is defining the objective of internal audit. As far as SIA 240 is concerned, using the work of an expert, again, something which is a norm nowadays. But then having said that, what the standard tells you is that even if you are using the work of an expert, it has to be in conformation with the auditing standards. It has to be in conformation with your engagement letter and IA charter. Expert coming on board, it's your responsibility to carry out proper due diligence around that expert, to design the scope and the approach of that expert, and to ensure that the work performed by the expert is correct, to review that work, and to take the ultimate responsibility. Nothing wrong in getting an expert on board, and that is the requirement of today's day. But then the ultimate responsibility is with you. So that is how you summarize the SIA 240. If you go and read both the SIA, they are documented very simply. Once you read the complete text of the SIA, it would really help to link what I have been speaking the last 30-40 minutes. Now, just to before I end this presentation, there are a few cartoons which I always show in most of my presentation. This is the first one, which says, having audited your accounts, we can't find anything at all suspicious, which makes us very suspicious. And this is something which I've seen so many times, and most of the auditors would identify with this, because what happens is a lot of times we go on at client place, we are there for 3-4 weeks, or our team is there for 3-4 weeks, and they come back to us and tell us, sir, everything is fine, and I did not find any audit observations. In a situation like this, the auditor becomes the most suspicious. And that is the highlight of, I don't know, a good or a bad auditor, but that's the highlight of an auditor, because in a situation where there are no audit findings, everybody will stand up and they'll not really appreciate the process owners, but they'll first look at the internal auditor that, did you do your job right? Because how can it be that you did not find any audit observation? The second one which I have is actually something which is very relevant in today's time, especially in the COVID environment. Work has been very stressful, and we've been auditing in remote environment. And this is talks about who said auditing is stressful. I'm 35 and I feel great, because the stress today is a lot as far as internal audit is concerned. But then, having said that, I think internal audit, the way it is growing in today's environment, and how everybody is focusing on internal audit, because I am seeing audit committees, management really putting a lot of time and effort behind internal audit, and also a lot of promoter-driven companies who are not mandated by law to carry out internal audit are also coming up and appointing internal auditors, because they want to hear from an external agency that what can they do to improve themselves. And that is where I think internal audit in the next few years is going to be one of the most significant practice for every chartered accountant. And that is where for us, it's great that all these SIAs are being mandated by the institute, and we're coming up with new SIAs also, so that we have a common framework to work under. So that was it from my end. I think I've taken exactly 40 minutes. So I've done well to stay within my budget. So, Parashar, do we have any questions? Would be happy to take if we have any questions.
First of all, thank you so much for such a nice presentation, and the last cartoon which you have shown to us, it's something which is very good from our side. It is not possible for the auditor if he has done the work in the parameters and according to the standards to find some mistakes in a company and an organization. That's totally true. So we have certain questions, sir. So first question. Can standard on auditing be applied or used as a yardstick while performing internal audit?
Okay, I am not too sure exactly, what's the requirement from that question. But see, SIAs gives you a broad framework around how internal audit has to be carried out. You have to obviously look at the SIAs, follow them, but then it has to be, you have to understand the purpose behind the SIA and the situation around it. If tomorrow internal auditor has not really applied his professional judgment, he has not done work, he's not gone deep into the things, he has not really applied the auditing methods, then he cannot say that, okay, I followed the SIAs and that is it, because there are certain expectations from the audit committee and from the management also. So SIAs give you a broad framework, but then there will always be a situation where the expectation might be to go over and above the SIAs also. That has to be kept in mind looking at the situation.
Thank you, sir. And the next question is, sir, what is the difference between co-sourcing and outsourcing? How to differentiate between these two words?
Okay, fantastic question. So see, co-sourcing is somewhere where you have your in-house internal audit department also, and you have an external firm also doing the internal audit with you. So let's say in a situation like, let's say it's a large company and they have an in-house internal audit department. They have 10 people who are carrying out internal audit. And then for certain specific engagements, they bring out external CA firms or professional firms to carry out internal audit. And then they jointly deliver the work. That is a co-sourcing model. So you have, you're working in a cohesive environment. You're co-working basically. Second is completely outsourced, where you do not have any in-house internal audit department. You do not have anybody in the department, and you have maybe a CA firm or professional firm whom you have outsourced the complete work, and then maybe the partner of the firm, he goes on and makes the presentation to the audit committee. There's no involvement from an in-house internal audit. That is an outsourced internal audit. There are pros and cons of both. Most of the times what you are seeing is most of the companies are adopting the co-source model, at least the large scale companies, because it sort of gives you the best of both worlds. The in-house team ensures that, the coordination and the company objectives and the coordination with the management and communication is maintained. And the outsourced internal auditor bring in the required expertise and best practices from other industries. So co-sourcing is something which is largely seen in larger companies.
Thank you, sir. One more question from my side, sir. As we can see that the technology involvement of technologies has been increased tremendously in the recent environment. So, what is the role and the responsibility the internal auditor have in this particular scenario? Because, like in your example, that Uber, Ola, earlier there was no concept 10 years down the line, but now everything is going online. And how we can maintain the working papers in these type of environment where everything is going through work from home environment. Mm-hmm. So in this scenario, what we can do?
Right. So there are two things, I think, to your question. One is ensuring that we are maintaining, the adequate work papers and stuff like that. And second is how to do the audit itself, because it is changing so much. See, from the perspective of how to do the audit, I think it's about learning every day, and that is where the second standard which I spoke about, using the work of experts, becomes very important. You cannot go to a client and tell him that I'll provide you complete assurance, but then you don't know how his business works. If it's an IT company, it is maybe a company which is completely on IT systems, and there is no infra, there is no manufacturing or something which is happening. There are limitations to what we can do as chartered accountants. We might not be able to do that kind of data crunching or going into configuration of their systems and stuff like that. There are companies like, for example, utility companies. If you're doing the internal audit of a power distribution company, they have lakhs and lakhs of customers. Telecom companies, they have lakhs of customers. If you download a simple billing register of a telecom company, it will run into crores and billions and all. Now, I obviously know how to use MS Excel, but then there's a limitation to what I can do. And that is where you need those experts who are experts in data analytics, big data and stuff like that to come into picture and help you out. Obviously, the premise of the business remains the same. Educate internal controls, understanding the business, that nothing can take away from us as chartered accountants. We are the best in that. But then nothing wrong in getting those experts on board and also being fair and open to the client also in those cases. If you're external firm, these are the cases where I need those experts. If he's telling you that I need you to help me out, ensure that I've done a capex of 500 crores, nothing has gone wrong. Now that cannot be done without the help of an engineer or civil engineer. You cannot expect a chartered accountant to go there and understand the drawings and come up with an audit observation. We can obviously do the commercial part of it. The techno-commercial audit, it can only happen if you have a technical guy on board. And that is where doing those strategic partnership with those experts become very very important. So we have to sort of relook at the way we are also doing our work, because the expectations from internal auditors is also increasing tremendously. Everybody, my co-speaker also spoke about ROI concept. Everybody is looking at that this is the amount that I'm spending of internal audit and I need 5x or 10x sort of a value. And obviously for us also to renew our engagements, to ensure that the client remains with us, we have to show them that value. And for that, we have to collaborate with other people. It might happen that, first year you might have to shell out some of your fees to some third party. But then if you're able to showcase that value to the client that, hey, look, I got an engineer on board and this is the cost that I saved. Next year, you will be able to, I'm sure, charge a good fee to him also. This is that premise.
Thank you so much, Ankur. The next question is, documentation of paperwork and procedure can be in the soft copy, or is it mandatory to maintain it in the hard copy?
No, it can be in the soft copy. There is no mandatory of the hard copy. The only risk around the soft copy documentation, which I see from an internal audit perspective, having done a lot of remote audit in the last 1 year, is ensuring the authenticity of those documents in itself. Because most of the time, it is very easy to edit a PDF and a document. A signed PDF can be edited very easily. So back in the day where we were, looking at those physical documents, suddenly those are coming under as scanned copies. So ensuring that those are original, those are not tampered with, those sort of things are very important. Apart from that documentation part from the internal audit perspective, that can always be done in a soft copy. There are also tools around internal audit documentation like Teammate and other tools, which help you document all your work papers in a soft format. And that is the requirement and the need of the hour also, because you have to maintain those documents for life. And most of my document, like I don't remember signing off on any work paper physically in the last 4 or 5 years. Everything is online. We do it online, we archive the file online, and then it goes on the cloud and stays there forever. That is the way it works, because I think now hard copy is something which obviously we are recommending to our clients also to move away from hard copies and stuff. So I think a soft copy is fine.
So next question is, IEA charter, is it required by the consultancy firm who's doing internal audit of the clients, or it is required where IEA is in-house by the company?
So IEA charter is required where it is an in-house internal audit. For an outsourced internal audit, where you're a CA firm and doing internal audit, this is the engagement letter. That is basically your contract which you have with the client. The only thing is, ideally, the internal audit contract or the engagement letter that you have with your client has to be a little different from your maybe a statutory audit or any tax audit contract, because in the IEA engagement letter, you have to define things like limitations of scope also, things like what is our authority, what is roles and responsibility, who is the owner of the working papers and stuff like that. And that is why this standard becomes important, that even if you're a CA firm, you have to ensure that you have a proper engagement letter in place.
Thank you, sir. There are no more questions related to this. And Chandrakantji, if you have any question, you can also ask from the Ankurji.
No, this is a very new subject for me. I don't practice in internal audit, but I was listening to both the speakers very minutely, and both the speakers were really very good, and they have given a lot of insights to at least to a newcomer. And I think in detail they have explained us what exactly one has to look into when they have to carry out an internal audit function, or if they get an assignment in audit, then what are the things they have to look into. This is what both the speakers have spoken in detail. Really very wonderfully they have given the presentation, and I think all those who are joined here for hearing them, I think they must have benefited with a lot of stuff to do in internal auditing. This is what I feel.
Thank you, sir. Exactly. This is the same feeling which I am getting from these two speakers, that both the speakers has put the justice to 2 hour session, and they have provided each and everything in detail. And as far as the internal audit as a career opportunity is concerned, I must concentrate on this particular factor, that as we can see, the statutory auditor responsibility of statutory auditor is also increasing, and the internal auditor role and responsibilities has also been increased with time. And now the startups like Ola, Uber, or other companies like Flipkart and Amazon are also looking towards the chartered accountant for providing a very good consultancy related to internal audit, because they are big tech companies and they want us to associate with themselves and help us in getting the system automated, or getting the internal control built for the better controlling and auditing at their end only. So it was a very wonderful session from both the speakers, and I also want to thank Ankur Gupta ji and the speaker and the Chandrakant ji for staying here for 2 hours and listening each and every point so seriously.
Yes.
I also want to thank all the viewers who were attending this seminar from last 2 hours and patiently listening about the internal audit, which is I would say the future of our profession also. So thank you so much for joining, everybody, and thank you Ankur ji for joining on this webinar VCA, and thank you Chandrakant ji for joining us and providing the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Concluded, sir.